Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are embarking on a deep dive today into a collection of sources that explore something pretty profound. It's the philosophical architecture of the Quranic system of law and justice.
Right. And what's important to state up front is that we're really being asked to set aside the common frame of, cultural practice or passive ritual.
Exactly. Our sources demand something a lot more intellectually rigorous. They're
Yeah.
insisting we examine this whole thing as a cohesive, comprehensive, governing system of law. The word they use is Deen.
And that's what's so fascinating here, the immediate pivot the sauces make. They seem to move the discussion away from traditional, often, subjective theological interpretations, and they move it toward a strictly rational, almost functional understanding of these core concepts.
So our mission really is to get a handle on the logical scaffolding of what they call divine sovereignty.
That's it. And the core assertion we're presented with, and I have to say it is a radical one, is that the Creator is the only legitimate source of guidance in law.
And it's not just a declaration of power, is it? It's something else.
It's an assertion of competence.
Yeah.
And that distinction is everything.
That competence versus near power idea, I mean, that's crucial. It gives us our core thesis right out of the gate. The metaphysical concept of monotheism, which is known as Tawhid,
Right.
it has to translate directly into a practical, social, and political reality.
Which is legislative sovereignty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you accept the oneness of the Creator, you logically must accept the oneness of the lawgiver. The sources seem to say there is no middle ground.
There really isn't. And to establish that foundation, we have to start with a really rigorous definition of Tawhid.
Correct.
We're asked to move well beyond the simple idea of, oneness in a theological belief. The sources insist that the moment we acknowledge the Creator, we are viewing this oneness fundamentally as oneness in authority.
Authority. So it's not just an abstract belief about the nature of God.
Not at all. It's a statement about governance. If the Creator is absolute, if he is the disposer of all things, and this is a point that's affirmed multiple times in places like Surah Al-An'am, then his instruction, what the sources call the divine program, must by its very nature align perfectly with cosmic harmony.
And with universal moral truth, and I suppose with the precise needs of humanity.
That's the logical conclusion. The intellectual gravity of this premise is immense.
It really is. Because if the lawgiver is also the creator and the designer of the entire universe, then obedience. It kind of stops being just a religious obligation.
It becomes the only logical response.
Yes, the only logical and beneficial human response. Obedience in this framework is really about aligning human conduct, society, and economics with the foundational reality of the universe's design.
So any deviation from that design.
Any attempt to introduce, human caprice or error into that perfect system is, by definition, an act of intentional misalignment. It's choosing chaos over order.
And this is where we have to get really precise with our terminology, specifically regarding the word Ibadah.
Which is usually translated as worship.
Usually, yes. And for many people, that term conjures images of, prayer, fasting, or some kind of ritual devotion.
Sure.
But the sources derive a much deeper, purely functional definition. They pull it directly from the foundational statements of the faith, specifically from the opening chapter, Al-Fatiha, where it says, "It is you we worship, and you we ask for help."
Okay, so if I'm saying I am asking only you for help, then I must be relying only on the system, the guidance, and the laws that you have established. That shifts Ibadah completely.
Precisely. Ibadah is defined here as complete, active obedience and the following of the Creator's revealed laws in every single dimension of life.
So think of it less like bowing in prayer.
And more like actively implementing a comprehensive divine blueprint. The physical rituals are components, of course they are, but the essence is subordinating one's entire system, your moral code, your social structures, economic principles, political governance, to that divine guidance.
So to say, "we worship you," is actually a systemic declaration. It's a constitutional statement.
That's a great way to put it. It elevates Ibadah from a private act of devotion to a public, visible, and comprehensive systemic commitment.
So if I apply this to my life, it means my business practices, my legal decisions, my relationship with the environment, my political involvement, all of those things become facets of my Ibadah.
They have to be. And the sources then have to connect this deep idea of Tawhid directly to lawmaking authority.
And they do.
They do, and it's radical. This brings us to what is really the ultimate statement on Tawhid and authority, which we find in Surah Yusuf, verse 12.40. Legislation is not but for Allah.
Wow.
It's an explicit, uncompromising removal of the right of lawmaking, of legislation from all created entities.
And we have to appreciate the scope of that. It's not just a critique of, say, the religious authorities of the time.
Not at all. It fundamentally critiques all forms of legislative human tyranny, whether that comes from monarchies, inherited traditions, elected parliaments, or even the transient will of a political majority. If the law concerns a foundational moral or social principle, its source must be the creator, period.
That is a staggering implication. I
Hmm.
mean, it turns one of the most central theological concepts, shirk, or associating partners with the creator, into a political and legal concept.
It does.
If I'm understanding the sources correctly, they're defining the most grievous form of shirk, not as bowing to a physical idol, but as obeying human-made laws when those laws directly contradict the universal moral laws established by the Creator.
That is the core legal pivot. You are effectively granting partnership in legislative sovereignty to creation to fallible, self-serving, or, limited human entities.
It's a radical reframing.
It really is. It shifts the entire discussion of faith away from the subjective internal belief and anchors it firmly in the realm of observable, objective governance.
So if a community or an individual legislates based on desire, or on temporary advantage, or on cultural prejudice,
And that legislation conflicts with the Creator's declared standard of justice.
then that community has engaged in shirk.
They have granted legislative authority to a non-divine source. It's that simple.
So shirk moves from being, an error of the heart to being a violation of the constitution of the universe. It's an error of law and structure.
It is an error of structure, and one that results in inevitable societal breakdown. The sources are very clear on this.
And this active commitment to this exclusive governance, this legislative Tawhid, does it have a parallel in individual conduct?
It has a direct parallel. It's detailed in Surah Al-Kahf, verse 18.110. It commands the believer to do righteous work and not associate in the worship of his Lord anyone.
So Tawhid is intrinsically linked to action, not just contemplation.
It has to be.
So what defines that righteous work, Amal Sali, within this comprehensive system?
Amal Sali is the practical application of divine law in all aspects of life. And crucially, it must be free from human-invented dogma or, self-serving, self-justifying doctrines.
So to be righteous, the action has to be compliant with the perfect law.
That's the definition. Monotheism is, therefore, an active, conscious, and continuous commitment to living under the exclusive governance of the revealed injunctions. It is the active refusal to allow human caprice, whether it's individual or collective, to dictate morality, justice, or the distribution of resources.
Okay, but if we look at the immense political friction this concept must cause, the idea that all human political systems, if they contradict the divine standard, are fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
How do the sources address the practical feasibility of such an absolute claim to sovereignty?
That's a great question. And they address it not through compromise, but through the insistence that the system works, because it is rational. It is the most efficient, the most just, and the most sustainable system.
So the challenge isn't feasibility.
The challenge is human ego. It's the reluctance to relinquish the perceived right to dominate and define one's own affairs without reference to a higher, perfect standard. This absolute intellectual surrender to the rational objective law is what we call submission, or Islam.
Okay, so if the divine law is the sovereign authority, and we accept this radical idea that legislation belongs to the Creator alone, the natural next question has to be, how is that law transmitted? And what does obedience actually look like once the law is fully delivered?
Right. And the sources offer a really profound, clarifying chain of authority here. It moves from the human messenger to the objective text.
This feels like a critical point.
It is, and it requires some intellectual rigor. Let's analyze a verse from Surah An-Nisa 4.8. So this says, "He who obeys the messenger has obeyed Allah."
Okay.
Now, if we take the rationalist perspective that these sources are putting forward, they clarify that the term messenger, Rasul, refers primarily to the message itself.
The divine program delivered through the prophet.
Exactly. Therefore, obeying the messenger means diligently adhering to the content of the Quran.
So the authority is inherently and permanently vested in the text, in the revelation itself, and not in the person of the messenger after that revelation has been completed.
Yes.
That's a massive distinction, isn't it? It prevents the deification or the absolute personalization of the authority.
It absolutely does. The prophet's role was strictly to deliver, exemplify, and explain the divine law clearly. Once the law was delivered and complete, the law itself became the sole objective authority.
So this perspective subordinates things like personal traditions or later human interpretations to the objective, fixed text of the revelation.
It does, and in doing so, it secures the law's independence from human bias or subsequent manipulation. It frees the community from the burden of following subsequent generations of, imperfect human leaders, absolutely.
This principle of containment, the law being fixed by the text, it leads us to another powerful statement. It's in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 33.36, and it feels like an explicit check on individual ego.
It is.
It says, when Allah and His Messenger, meaning the divine law, have decided a matter, individuals have no further choice about their affair.
And this isn't about removing free will. We have to be clear on that. It's about defining the ethical boundaries of free will.
Okay, that makes sense.
It is a crucial check on human subjectivity and ego. It establishes that fundamental moral, social, and economic principles are settled by perfect external guidance.
So if a law is declared, let's say, a principle of economic fairness or a rule of evidence in court, it's no longer open to human substitution based on convenience or cultural norms.
Or inherited dogma, exactly. The system ensures stability, ethical clarity, and universal applicability by removing foundational laws from the realm of, ceaseless human debate and manipulation.
So human choice isn't eliminated.
Not at all. It operates logically and ethically within the settled boundaries set by the perfect law.
Okay. If that is the definition of obedience, this submission to an objective, fixed law, then what is the functional definition of its opposite, disbelief or kufr? The sources offer a legal definition here that is incredibly sharp and practical.
It is decisive. It's unforgiving in its intellectual clarity. A verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah 5.44 states, "Tor, and whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the disbelievers."
So kufr is functionally defined here not as a passive lack of internal belief or a momentary doubt.
No. It's the active legislative rejection of divine law as the basis for judgment and societal governance.
So it's a practical choice. It's reflected in one's legal and political actions.
Exactly. Disbelief, in this context, is the decision to replace divine sovereignty with human legislative tyranny. And we should look at the etymology of the word. Kufr literally means to cover or to conceal.
Okay.
Therefore, the act of kufr in a legislative sense means covering the truth of the divine moral and legal system with falsehood, with self-serving human laws, with cultural prejudices, or with the arbitrary imposition of power.
So it's the practical choice to ignore the criterion, the furqan, the distinguishing factor between truth and falsehood when you're establishing law.
That's it, precisely.
This means that the most profound act of faith is this intellectual and legal submission to the authority of the Quran in all affairs, both individual and communal.
And by extension.
And the greatest act of rejection is replacing that perfect system with a flawed, self-serving one. It makes the political choice the ultimate spiritual litmus test.
It integrates them entirely. The stability of the external world, the society, the economy, the political landscape, is seen as a direct reflection of the internal choices regarding sovereignty. If the society chooses human law over divine law, it is choosing instability and injustice.
Which the sources call kufr.
Yes. And obedience, conversely, is the conscious act of intellectual and social submission, which is the foundation of the entire system's promise of peace and order.
Okay, this intellectual scaffolding, it provides the necessary link between the purely transcendent nature of the Creator and the entirely material existence of humanity. So if the Creator has the sole right to legislate, and obedience is the only rational response, then what is the grand overarching purpose of humanity within this perfect legal system?
Well, Surah Ad-Dhariyat, verse 51.56, states the primary purpose very clearly. "And I did not create the jinn and mankind except to worship me."
Right, and here we have to go back to that rationalist definition of worship, of Ibadah, that we established earlier.
We must. It is the active, systemic, and practical submission of one's entire life, one's time, one's intellectual resources, one's wealth, one's labor to implementing the divine program.
So it's the entire pattern of a life lived according to divine principles, demonstrated through tangible actions that build justice.
Not merely ritualistic observance.
Exactly. This fundamentally defines human life as an arena for action, then. It's a testing ground. And that's reflected in Surah Al-Mulk, chapter 67, verse 2. It says, "Life was created to test you as to which of you is best indeed." It's the test of deeds, or amal.
Exactly. The purpose is not passive faith or abstract contemplation that's divorced from reality. It's the tangible production of the best deeds, asan amal.
What does that mean, best deeds?
It means the rigorous, continuous, and practical application of moral and legal commands to create goodness and establish justice in society. The human experience is the laboratory where we utilize our free will and our reason to manifest the divine program materially.
To ensure our actions align with the universal moral code.
Precisely.
This commitment to action, it sets the stage for humanity's assigned role, which the sources call stewardship, or Khalifa. Surah al-Baqarah identifies humanity as the successive authority upon the earth.
It does.
So given the legal framework we've just discussed, what does this authority specifically entail, and what are its limits?
This defines humanity's primary mission. It's to act as the moral, administrative, and economic implementers of divine law on earth. Think of it as a trusteeship over creation.
A trusteeship, I like that.
The authority is granted over the earth's resources and the structuring of society, but, and this is a huge but, that authority is strictly conditional. It's conditional upon adherence to the Creator's laws of balance.
So the Khalifa, the steward, must take the abstract, rational principles of the Quran, the Tawhid, and the Ibadah,
And establish a comprehensive socioeconomic and political system that is rooted in justice, adl, and mercy, Rahmah.
and if the implementer deviates from that,
The trusteeship is revoked, and that inevitably leads to societal failure.
it sounds like the sources are drawing a direct, undeniable line between revelation and the social engineering required for a functional society.
They are, and this is anchored in Surah Al-Hadid, chapter 57, verse 25. It states that messengers were sent with clear evidences, the scripture, and the balance that the people may maintain their affairs in justice. And this is the pivotal concept of the mizan, the balance.
Can you unpack the mizan for us in a bit more detail? Is it just a call for general fairness, or is it an actual systemic blueprint?
It is far more than a metaphor. It is the concrete, prescribed system for fair distribution, equity, and ethical conduct that's delivered in the scripture.
So it's a system.
It's a system. The mizan encompasses economic rules, social responsibilities, legal checks and balances. The purpose of all revelation, all scripture, all messengers is explicitly connected to establishing and maintaining this measurable system of justice.
So upholding this balance, making sure resources, power, and rights are distributed equitably according to the divine formula, that's the ultimate goal of all revelation.
It is, because it ensures societal harmony.
This means that if an economic system, for example, centralizes wealth into the hands of a few while the majority struggles, that system is demonstrably in violation of the mizan, regardless of whatever rhetoric is used to justify it.
Absolutely. It is a violation of the foundational contract of stewardship. And if we fail in this role as Khalifa and intentionally abandon the mizan by legislating inequality, the inevitable consequence is the ultimate failure, corruption or facade.
I see that term a lot.
You do. Surah Al-Araf warns explicitly, and cause not corruption upon the earth after its reformation.
And what defines facade in this legal sense? Is it just general badness?
No, it's more specific. Facade is the systemic disorder that occurs when human legislative efforts replace divine law. When humans legislate from self-interest or tribal prejudice, they inevitably create injustice and imbalance.
And this destroys the social and economic order that the mizan was designed to establish.
Precisely. Therefore, the entire mission of the believer, the Khalifa, is summed up in two intertwined commands. To worship, Ibadah, meaning to actively obey the rational law, and to establish justice, Qis, meaning to actively prevent facade and maintain the mizan.
So the two are inseparable in the divine system. You can't have one without the other.
You can't.
We've established the external system, sovereignty, law, justice, the framework of Khalifa. But the system, it seems to demand more than just outward adherence. It requires an internal motive that is equally pure.
That's right.
We're turning inward now to the ethical requirement of sincerity, or ikhlas. So obedience must be sincere, purifying one's motive from external pressures, from hypocrisy, or from the pursuit of human validation or praise.
The commitment to ikhlas is the necessary personal, internal, and spiritual manifestation of legislative monotheism.
Say more about that.
Well, it ensures that the action, however public or political it might be, is rooted in a pure, singular motive, fulfilling the Creator's law because it is the truth, not because of what society might think.
So if your obedience is driven by the desire for human power or recognition,
You are engaging in shirk of the intention. You've associated a partner in your motive. And this brings us to a crucial, nuanced analysis of the term often translated simply as religion.
which is Deen. We see it in Surah Al-Baqarah, which directs believers.
Oh.
And they were not commanded except to worship Allah, being sincere to him in religion, inclining to truth.
And the sources really stress that Deen must be understood not as a set of disconnected private rituals or ceremonies, but as the integrated system of life and law established by the Creator.
A comprehensive program.
A comprehensive program intended to uplift humanity to social, personal, and political greatness and justice. It covers belief, ethics, economics, and governance. Therefore, sincerity in Deen Ikhlas means the entire socioeconomic and moral structure built by believers must be based exclusively on divine guidance.
Wow. So if the external laws and judgments of a community are based on human whim or historical accident or power politics, even if that community is technically religious in a ritual sense, that structure fundamentally violates the sincerity required for Deen.
That's the argument. Sincerity here is intellectual honesty. The term used is hanif, which means following the objective truth wherever it leads, even if it violently challenges established, corrupt human traditions.
That is a powerful insight, and the sources seem to reflect on the tragedy of reducing this revolutionary, comprehensive Deen, this blueprint for a perfect society, to just mere rituals and personal piety.
They do. When the external divine law is abandoned for non-Quranic judgments, the profound, comprehensive claims of the divine system are tragically obscured.
And it makes the divine law appear to outsiders as nothing more than blind indoctrination.
Right. Rather than a robust, rational, and just blueprint for human governance.
In essence, then, if the system you live under isn't rooted entirely in the pursuit of justice based on divine law, your ikhlas, your sincerity, is compromised because you are participating in a system that inevitably creates facade.
That's the implication. And the commitment to this truth necessitates moral independence. We see in Surah Az-Zumar a command for undivided loyalty. The Creator's system requires that the believer's active obedience, their Ibadah, must be free from partnership with any human authority. This is the ultimate safeguard against practical shirk.
That freedom that ikhlas grants is profound. It means the individual have a level of moral autonomy that would be unattainable under systems subject to human legislative whims. So if the state or the culture or even the family demands an action that contradicts the clear objective divine law, the sincere individual is already mandated to reject that human command.
It places the individual outside the reach of all human legislative tyranny.
Let's turn now to the rational guarantee of this entire system. I mean, we need to justify why divine law is inherently more just, more competent, and more sustainable than any human-devised system.
And the answer, as the sources clearly articulate, lies in the singular attributes of the Creator, specifically his comprehensive knowledge.
So this is where we get into Tawhid Rububiyyah, the oneness of lordship.
Right. And from a strictly rationalist standpoint, the lawgiver must be inseparable from the Creator. It is illogical to suggest that a perfect machine could be designed by one entity only for another, less competent entity to write the user manual.
Right, that wouldn't make any sense.
Think about Surah Al-Mulk. Blessed is he in whose hand is the dominion, and he is over all things competent. Dominion, Mulk, signifies supreme ownership. And because the Creator is competent, Qadir, his governance is intrinsically flawless.
And this intrinsic competence translates directly and necessarily into law-giving authority. We saw this earlier in Surah Al-Araf. Unquestionably, his is the creation and the command. The Khalq and the Amar are absolutely linked.
The command, the Amr, is the essential rulebook. It's the governing code for the entire creation. Since the Creator designed and brought the universe into existence, he alone possesses the comprehensive knowledge required to issue the law for its optimal governance.
So seeking law-giving authority, especially for foundational moral codes, from any human source, is not just a theological transgression.
It's an act of intellectual incompetence. It's irrational. Human lawmaking is inherently incapable of accounting for all variables, all long-term consequences, and all the spiritual and material needs of the creation. It inevitably introduces chaos and facade.
And that absolute knowledge, what's described as the keys of the unseen, Kabe, is the absolute prerequisite for a perfect moral code. I'm thinking of a verse in Surah Al-An'am that speaks of the Creator's comprehensive knowledge of all variables and consequences, past, present, future, the seen and the unseen.
And this comprehensive knowledge ensures that the system of consequence is precise and inescapable. By being the knower of the unseen and the witnessed, the Creator's awareness covers all reality, all intentions, and all potential outcomes.
This knowledge guarantees the perfection of the moral code.
And it reinforces the rationalist tenet that no action, no deviation from the law can ever escape the system of precise consequence. Divine justice, adl, is utterly precise for every accountable soul because it's based on omniscience.
This precision is reflected directly in the core principle of individual sovereignty and responsibility. A verse in Surah Al-Isra is very clear, and no bearer of burdens will bear the burden of another.
This is absolutely foundational to the concept of fairness and adl. Reward or consequence is based solely on a person's conscious choices and actions, their amal.
So it rigorously refutes doctrines of transferred responsibility, things like inherited sin or relying on intermediaries for salvation or forgiveness.
All of it. Guidance, hidayah, and error are internal, active, intellectual, and moral choices whose benefits and burdens accrue exclusively to the individual. The system establishes a direct relationship between the moral choice made by the individual and the consequence they face.
And the law itself respects this individuality by making sure its demands are feasible. Surah Al-Baqarah states that the Creator does not charge a soul except with that within its capacity.
This establishes divine fairness as a feature of the law itself. The law, the Deen, must be within human capacity to understand, to rationalize, and to implement.
Which implies that the law must be clear, non-contradictory, and accessible to reason. It's not just an arbitrary list of rituals.
Exactly. The focus is entirely on what the individual has gained or earned through their conscientious choices, ensuring a direct and proportional relationship between deed, amal, and consequence, jaza. The system is maximally fair because its demands are perfectly aligned with human capability.
Okay, so stepping beyond individual accountability now, the sources introduce a really profound concept, Sunat Allah fil Mujtama, the social law. This is the idea that societal dynamics, the rise and fall of civilizations, are governed by fixed, predictable, and inescapable laws of cause and effect. It fundamentally rejects the notion of arbitrary fate or divine favoritism.
This is perhaps the most profound socio-political insight for collective governance in the entire framework. Surah Arad, verse 13.11, states that Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves.
That's a deterministic social formula.
It is. Prosperity, security, or suffering is the predictable, non-arbitrary consequence of a community's collective moral character, its commitment to justice, and its ethical application of the law.
So prosperity is not a gift, and collapse is not a curse. They are both the inevitable output of the community's legislative input and ethical choices.
That's a perfect summary. The Creator does not intervene supernaturally to grant or withhold favor. The condition of a nation is the direct, predictable output of the moral and ethical input provided by its people.
So when a community deviates collectively, embracing systemic injustice or corruption, facade, or abandoning the mizan,
they initiate the negative change themselves, and the divine law simply executes the inevitable consequence.
There's another verse in Surah Al-Anfal that reinforces this. It talks about collective accountability. Favor, so peace, prosperity, security, is the systemic result of implementing the laws of social order and justice. When a community deviates, they are responsible for their own subsequent decline.
The people, therefore, are the sole architects of their own rise and fall. And this places an enormous rational responsibility on the collective moral choices of the community.
So there's no external entity, no other nation, and no arbitrary fate to blame when a society collapses.
The fault lies within its own legislative choices and its own moral compromises. This is the ultimate call for political and social self-determination based on ethical responsibility.
Okay, so given everything we've discussed, legislative sovereignty, Tawhid, individual accountability, Idal, the societal balance, Mizan Bikan, we arrive at the ultimate, tangible, practical goal of the entire divine system, the Deen.
Right.
And that is establishing unwavering justice, or kinbel kizo. The sources describe this active pursuit of justice as the highest form of worship, the highest form of Ibadah.
It is. Establishing a just social and economic system is the practical manifestation of Tawhid. And the command for this commitment to justice is absolute. It overrides all other human loyalties.
You're talking about the verse in Surah An-Nisa.
4.135, yes. It demands that believers be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives.
That is a radical ethical command.
Yeah.
I mean, it requires the rigorous intellectual discipline to separate the truth from one's own immediate self-interest or the powerful emotional bonds of family and kinship. How does one even apply justice that is against yourselves?
It demands the sacrifice of personal comfort, reputation, or financial gain for the sake of absolute fairness. Imagine a scenario where you, as a judge or an arbitrator, have to rule on a contract dispute where your close relative clearly stands to lose because they breached the contract.
That's a difficult position.
Yeah, it is. But to be a witness for Allah is to make your commitment to truth and fairness so visible and so consistent that it serves as living proof of the divine law's objectivity. Justice is paramount over kinship, tradition, or personal gain. It requires incredible moral discipline and profound intellectual honesty.
And if that wasn't demanding enough on the internal commitment, the sources challenge us to conquer the corrosive effect of emotion and bias in judgment.
That's right.
Surah Al-Ma'idah takes us a crucial step further, saying, "And do not let the hatred of a people prevent you from being just."
And this is the ultimate test of impartiality. It is the pinnacle of rational law application. Justice must be enacted rationally, even toward those who are disliked, hostile, or even actively trying to harm you.
And so the law is not based on feeling or revenge or retribution.
No, it is a fixed objective standard that operates externally to human emotion. The rule applies equally to your friend and your declared enemy. The hatred of a person or a political faction must not influence the legal process one iota.
This confirms that the divine law requires a rigorous intellectual discipline to uphold, guaranteeing equal protection and rights for all, regardless of affiliation or personal antagonism,
It removes the foundational excuse for tyranny.
which is always rooted in selective application of the law based on tribal loyalty or personal vendetta.
Precisely. The moment you allow hatred or fear or personal bias to inform your judgment or your legislation, you have replaced the fixed divine law with human caprice. You've violated the principle of kisa, and you have inevitably introduced facade into the system.
The rational law must be applied universally and objectively to maintain the societal balance, the mizan.
It must. The ultimate success of the Deen is measured by the unwavering standard of justice it establishes for all members of society, friend and foe alike.
So it's the ultimate expression of faith, demonstrating that the rational law prescribed by the Creator is superior to human emotion, human self-interest, and human tribalism.
And that demonstration provides profound stability. When all parties, regardless of their position, know that the system of law will operate objectively, without prejudice, it builds a foundation of trust that transcends political, economic, and social divisions.
The consistency of justice is the practical proof of divine sovereignty.
That's it. So to synthesize the expansive, rational territory we've covered, the intellectual framework of the divine system, the Deen, it really hinges on 5 interconnected core principles, and they are all derived directly from these sources.
And these principles demand not passive belief, but active implementation.
Active implementation. So first you have Tawhid, which is legislative sovereignty. The absolute commitment that the Creator alone is the lawgiver, ensuring competence and perfection in the code.
Okay, that's number 1.
Second, obedience and submission, Islam. This is the active, sincere, and practical implementation of the objective, clear text of the Quran in all aspects of life, recognizing the law as the supreme authority.
Independent of the messenger's person, as we discussed.
Correct. Third, the purpose of life. To fulfill the mandate of the test of deeds, producing the best deeds, asanamal, by actively working to establish goodness and justice.
Right.
Fourth is stewardship, khilafa. Humanity's conditional mission to apply the Quran's principles to create an equitable, balanced social and economic structure, which is qiyam bil kisa, maintaining the mizan. And fifth, accountability, ayl, which is individual, precise, inescapable, and non-transferable, and it's guaranteed by the Creator's absolute knowledge and perfect fairness.
So what does this all mean for us, the learner? The sources consistently define the necessary counterpart to monotheism, to Tawhid, as the active intellectual and political rejection of all false deities and man-made systems of tyranny. There's a term for this, right?
Yes, the term is Taghut.
Taghut.
Taghut is defined as anything that tempts a human being to transgress the boundaries set by divine law. It includes political tyranny, economic oppression, superstitious traditions, and any system, social, economic, or political, that demands loyalty and obedience above the Creator's objective command.
So the imperative of Tawhid is the dismantling of these systems.
And the ensuring of purity in the societal structure.
Yes. So if monotheism is truly a declaration of political and economic freedom from all human-made tyranny, from Taghut, we have to ask ourselves a pretty tough question. What systems of law, command, or tradition in modern life, social media norms, corporate loyalty structures, political dogma, or inherited national narratives, are we unknowingly granting legislative partnership to? And how does absolute, unwavering adherence to a rational, objective divine law fundamentally liberate the individual from those pervasive, yet often invisible man-made constraints?
And that intellectual and practical liberation.
That is the profound challenge of a sincere commitment to the divine system.